Welcome to the Celtic Myth Pod Show, bringing the tales and stories of the ancient Celts to your fireside.
Special episode number 44, Sealskin and Sea Spray. Hello, I'm Gary.
And I'm Ruth, and welcome to our special show dedicated to those magical sea creatures, the Selkies.
We've got a lot for you in this show. It's going to be huge.
But before we start, let's tell you how you can get hold of us.
Good idea. You can email us at celticmythshow@gmail.com or leave us some voice feedback using SpeakPipe to play on the show on our website at celticmythpodshow.com.
And you can chat to us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all the rest of them, anytime you like. You can find all of the contact details on our contact page on our website at celticmythpodshow.com. But you knew that anyway, didn't you?
Well, I did. Should we find out a bit more about the show in our news and views section?
Let's do it.
In this show, we've got 5 fantastic pieces of music about Selkies and the sea, and an amazing story read to us by Elizabeth, the Faerytale Apothecary.
We've also got 2 other stories and 1 fascinating information piece. It's about the Folklore of Selkies by Morgan Daimler. But before we get on with the show, let's talk about where we're going with the pod show next.
Well, we should be bringing you some more of these special shows, and maybe continuing on with our storytelling shows.
Yes, it'll be a little bit different from previous shows, but we hope you enjoy the special shows we bring you.
Absolutely. So where are we going to begin?
Well, let's make a start with the cracking piece of music from Dave the Bard. This is a track from Hearn's Apprentice, which is Dave's first album, and opens our show with the first song about a Selkie.
And guess what it's called? It's called
The Selkie.
The Selkie.
Watch the ocean rolling in, moonlight tripping off the waves along the bays, like a mirror between the worlds. I catch the reflection of a star, but it slips through my fingers. Then out of the waters, from out of the waves, 2 eyes are looking at me. Oh, I wanna go to the sea again. Where the Selkies dance and I don't feel alone. I wanna go to the sea again. White horses gallop upon the shore, then canter once more. lying upon the beach. Free your mind and dance with me within the sea. I turn back to look at the places I know, but my Selkie woman calls to me, and I go. I wanna go to the sea again. No, where the Selkies dance and I don't feel alone. I wanna go to the sea again. So I run into the waves where my Selkies are waiting for me, and together we swim. She takes me into her world where I am her king and she is my queen. I have always lived here. Now what could wake me from out of this sleep? Could that be the dawning sun? No, no. I wanna go to the sea again. No, where the Selkies dance and I don't feel alone. Tonight I'll go down to the sea again.
And that was Dave the Bard with the Selkie from his album Hearn's Apprentice. I love that song. It's great, isn't it?
It was. It's a beautiful song.
So Dave says of this song, it's the story of a man who feels trapped by his life and yearns to see freedom and love walking towards him through the waves. Quite an interesting image, that one.
It is, isn't it? You can find out more about Dave and his music in our show notes at celticmythpodshow.com/sealfolk.
And now it's time for our first story, which is a piece of classic folklore dating back to 1895. Tom Moore and the Seal Woman. It comes from the book Tales of the Fairies and of the Ghost World by Jeremiah Curtin.
Tom Moore and the Seal Woman by Jeremiah Curtin. In the village of Kilshenig, 2 miles northeast of Castle Gregory, there lived at one time a fine, brave young man named Tom Moore, a good dancer and singer. 'Tis often he was heard singing among the cliffs and in the fields of a night. Tom's father and mother died, and he was alone in the house and in need of a wife. One morning early, when he was at work near the strand, he saw the finest woman ever seen in that part of the kingdom, sitting on a rock, fast asleep. The tide was gone from the rocks then, and Tom was curious to know who she was or what brought her, so he walked towards the rock. "Wake up," cried Tom to the woman. "If the tide comes, 'twill drown you." She raised her head and only laughed. Tom left her there, but as he was going, he turned every minute to look at the woman. When he came back, he caught the spade, but couldn't work. He had to look at the beautiful woman on the rock. At last the tide swept over the rock. He threw the spade down and away to the strand with him, but she slipped into the sea and he saw no more of her that time. Tom spent the day cursing himself for not taking the woman from the rock, when it was God that sent her to him. He couldn't work out the day. He went home. Tom could not sleep a wink all that night. He was up early the next morning and went to the rock. The woman was there. He called to her. No answer. He went up to the rock. "You may as well come home with me now," said Tom. Not a word from the woman. Tom took the hood from her head and said, "I'll have this." The moment he did that, she cried, "Give me back my hood, Tom Moore." "Indeed I will not, for 'twas God sent you to me, and now that you have speech I'm well satisfied." And taking her by the arm, he led her to the house. The woman cooked breakfast, and they sat down together to eat it. "Now," said Tom, "in the name of God, you and I'll go to the priest and get married, for the neighbours round here are very watchful, and they be talking." So after breakfast they went to the priest, and Tom asked him to marry them. "Where did you get the wife?" asked the priest. Tom told the whole story. When the priest saw Tom was so anxious to marry, he charged £5, and Tom paid the money. He took the wife home with him, and she was as good a woman as ever went into a man's house. She lived with Tom 7 years, and had 3 sons and 2 daughters. One day, Tom was ploughing, and some part of the plough rigging broke. He thought there were bolts on the loft at home, so he climbed up to get them. He threw down bags and ropes while he was looking for the bolts, and what should he throw down but the hood, which he took from the wife 7 years before. She saw it the moment it fell, picked it up and hid it. At that time people heard a great seal roaring out in the sea. "Ah," said Tom's wife, "that's my brother looking for me." Some men who were hunting killed 3 seals that day. All the women of the village ran down to the strand to look at the seals, and Tom's wife with the others. She began to moan, and going up to the dead seals, she spoke some words to each and then cried out, "Oh, the murder!" And when they saw her crying, the men said, "We'll have nothing more to do with these seals." So they dug a great hole, and the 3 seals were put into it and covered. But some thought in the night, "'Tis a great shame to bury those seals after all the trouble in taking them." And those men went with shovels and dug up the earth, but they found no trace of the seals. All this time the big seal in the sea was roaring. Next day, when Tom was at work, his wife swept the house, put everything in order, washed the children and combed their hair, and then taking them one by one she kissed each. She went next to the rock, and putting the hood upon her head, gave a plunge, and that moment the big seal rose and roared so that people 10 miles away could hear him. Tom's wife went away with the seal, swimming in the sea. All the 5 children that she'd left had webs between their fingers and toes, halfway to the tips. The descendants of Tom Moore and the seal woman are living near Castle Gregory to this day, and the webs are not gone yet from between their fingers and toes, although decreasing with each generation.
Well, that was fascinating. I love these old stories.
I do too.
Obviously, the hood that Tom stole from the seal woman was her skin, as we'll find out later in other stories.
That's true. And isn't it interesting that the descendants of Tom and his bride have webbed fingers and toes?
Yeah, I wonder which one came first.
I do.
Does the story go on to explain the webbing, or did the web hands and feet come after the tail? I wonder.
Who knows?
I don't know. Interesting, though.
Let's have another piece of music. What have you got for us?
Well, have a listen to the first of 2 tracks from the outstanding folk duo, Kate and Corwen, who I absolutely love. These 2 tracks come from their superb double album, Fish or Fowl, which... you know what I'm talking about now, don't you? Which contains some beautiful Selkie songs.
Right. So let's have a listen to The Seal Woman's Lament by Kate and Corwen.
Hoey, 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 hee. Hoey, 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 haramir modern rep. Hoey, 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 hee. Hoey, 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 haramir modern rep. Satterland, people prey upon our clan. Boiling on a cooking fire is the chief of all our men. Hoey, 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 hee. Hoey, 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 haramir modern rep. Hoey, 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 hee.
daughter of He, the son of the Owen. I'm well acquainted with reefs. It would be a pity for anyone to hit me, for I'm a gentlewoman from a strange land, gentlewoman from a strange land, gentlewoman from a strange land. Ichichichen kochtach minitan, vishatunya peka, kudimla krekan, vishatunya mora, pokam salora, vishatunya pek Peter, concealed,
And that was The Seal Woman's Lament by Kate and Corwen.
Lovely track, lovely track. So what do we actually know about the folklore surrounding Selkies?
Well, let's turn to one of the most respected fairy folklorists, Morgan Daimler, for an answer.
Good idea, good idea.
Selkies by Morgan Daimler.
Selkies are a fascinating ocean fairy who can take the form of either a human or a seal. Called Rowan or Rowan in Irish and Selkies, Silkies or Selkies in Scotland, Shetland or the Orkneys. The name Selkie is derived from the Scottish word selch, itself drawn from the Old English seoch, all meaning seal. The Irish word roan also means seal. Their folklore is fairly consistent across any area, although there are slight variations. For example, Orkney Selkies are known to have some ability at prophecy, and Roan are gentler and more forgiving than their Scottish counterparts. Selkies are also one of the kinds of fairy who are often very intertwined with humans, making Selkie lore slightly more prominent, particularly in coastal areas. Selkies in their seal form are indistinguishable physically from ordinary seals, except for their eyes, which are unusual and expressive. In human form, they are noted to have dark hair and eyes, and folklore differs on whether they appear to be exceptionally attractive or ordinary. The key to the Selkie's ability to transform was its seal skin, which is both part of the fairy and also separate from it, making it both a source of power and a weakness. In some Scottish folklore, it's claimed that the human form is the Selkie's true one, and the seal form is only assumed with magic. Without the seal skin, the Selkie could not transform into the seal shape, and in its seal form, according to some folklore, if the skin was damaged or forcibly removed, the Selkie would die. In the folklore of the Orkneys, the Selkie's shape-shifting is somewhat limited, with some tales claiming they can only come ashore in human form on midsummer, and others that they must wait 7 or 9 days in the sea before returning to land again. Orkney folklore offers a few explanations for the origins of Selkies. From a more Christian perspective, it is said that they may be the angels who fell into the sea when God was expelling the rebellious angels from heaven, while other stories say they're the souls of drowned humans, or those who have committed a great wrong and been condemned into the form of a seal as punishment.
Selkie stories generally feature either the fairy wife theme, with the Selkie compelled to her mortal husband's side, or else a variation of the Lian Shi motif, with human and Selkie coming together in a more voluntary manner. The latter type of story is somewhat less common and tends to involve male Selkies and female humans. Some scholars interpret Selkie stories in a way that views the male Selkies as more noble and the females as more emotionally driven. But that is an oversimplification. Briggs repeats a tale exemplifying this concept of a young woman dissatisfied with her husband, who conjured a Selkie lover for herself and had many children with him over many years. Male Selkies have reputations for being both amorous and rather fickle. As the previous example shows, however, they're able to maintain longer relationships when they choose to. Although more often, as noted by the Orcadian folklorist Denison, they would simply come ashore seeking an unsatisfied woman open to their attentions and then return to the sea. Unlike some other male fairies who had human lovers, male Selkies did not seek to take their human lovers into the sea with them very often. What stories we do have along that vein involve the human being turning into a Selkie or drowning. In the fairy wife type stories, the Selkie is forced into a relationship when her seal skin is stolen by an amorous human man who finds it. Bound on land without the transformative magic of her seal skin, the Selkie goes with him as his wife, keeping his home and bearing him children, until the day she finally finds out where her seal skin has been hidden. In many versions of these stories, it's one of her own children that eventually finds the cleverly hidden skin and reveals its location to her. Once she has her skin back, she returns immediately to the water, abandoning her unwanted spouse as well as her children. In many cases, it does seem the children, at least, were loved by the Selkie, and there are stories of Selkies who would, after returning to the sea, ensure that their children always had plenty of fish and excellent fishing. Much folklore describes the union between humans and Selkie and the children produced. The children of Selkies and humans are said in folklore to be born with webbed hands or feet, a trait that carries down a family line. One famous example of this comes from the Orkneys, where a woman named Ursula was said to have taken a Selkie lover and have had many children by him, all of whom were born with webbed hands and feet. These webs were cut with iron shears and turned into hard growths upon the hands and feet. This trait was passed down through the descendants of Ursula, so that while the story passed into folklore, the evidence of the birth defect associated with it was noted by folklorist Walter Dennison. In an 1893 article he wrote detailing Ursula's story. When the mother is the Selkie, she may abandon her half-human children when she has a chance to return to the sea. When the father is Selkie, he may take his child with him or leave him with their mother. In one account from the Orkneys, a woman and a Selkie have a child, and after a year the Selkie returns to take the boy with him into the sea, but lets the human mother know where she might be able to go to the shore and see her son. Several families, including the McColdrums and the Macroons, claim descent from Selkie women. There have been several popular movies featuring these fairies in the last several decades, including The Secret of Rowan Inish, which was based on an earlier novel, and The Song of the Sea.
Well, that was brilliant, and it comes from a book that's essential for anyone who wants to know more about fairies.
Yes, we were sent a review copy of Morgan Daimler's new Dictionary of Fairies by the UK publisher Moon Books earlier this year, and Morgan has very kindly given us permission to read her entry on Selkies for this episode. It's an absolutely amazing book. If you have an interest in fairies or folklore, you need this book on your shelf. It's a veritable go-to of fairy knowledge. It's easily accessed and understandable to the layperson as well as the academic. I was seriously impressed when I read it. It's definitely on our shelves. The book is incredibly well researched, complete with references and a really helpful bibliography.
Morgan covers a huge variety of fairy folklore. She talks about the good folk without the whimsy or romance of many fairy books, and doesn't skirt around the sometimes amoral nature of the fae. In her introduction, she writes about Catherine Briggs' Encyclopedia of Fairies, which has been the best fairy lore go-to on folklorist shelves for the last 3 decades.
Daimler's new Dictionary of Fairies easily supersedes Catherine Briggs' encyclopedia, updating fairy lore relating not only to early but also modern interactions with the fae folk. Her love of Celtic folklore comes across in this book, and her ability to read Middle Irish has allowed her access to early texts, giving her descriptions insight that many others miss.
She covers the origin stories of fae and themes as diverse as the Shakespearean fae, all the way to fairy colours. She references known fairy and folklore scholars such as Evans Wentz and the 15th century writings of Scottish minister Robert Kirk. It's an absolutely invaluable book to have on your bookshelf, and details of where to find the book are in our show notes at celticmythpodshow.com/sealfolk.
An absolutely super book. Really enjoyable, one to go and buy. Go and buy it right now. Anyway, after that, moving on, it's time we cracked on. What else have we got?
I think it's time we had a bit more music. What do you think?
Yes. Let's have a listen to Richard Price as the Raevyn Project with his evocative track, The Wild and Stepping Sea.
Andorand and Solder, the tide at thy head and feet, the wind about thy shoulder. Though the song should know thy fame, though the wind bring back thy name, they can never bring thee home that walked the seas in sorrow. Anderand and Solder, Anderand and Solder, the tide at thy head and feet, the wind about thy shoulder. Far from me is singing gone, far from me is laughter gone. They can never bring thee home that walked the seas in sorrow. Anderand and Solder, Anderand and Solder, the tide at thy head and feet, the wind about thy shoulder. Now the deep a home for thee, now the seal thy keeper be. Now the seabird hear thy cry, that walked the seas in sorrow. Anderand and Solder, Anderand and Solder, the tide at thy head and feet, the wind about thy shoulder. Call the wild and stepping sea, call the wave to comfort thee. May she bear thee peacefully, the windy world over. Anderand and Solder, Anderand and Solder, the tide at thy head and feet, the wind about thy shoulder. Anderand and Solder, Anderand and Solder, the tide at thy head and feet, the wind about thy shoulder. Call the wild and stepping sea, call the wave to comfort thee. May she bear thee peacefully, the windy world over, the windy world over, the windy world over, the windy world over.
That was the Raevyn Project with Wild and Stepping Sea.
Beautiful track. You can almost feel the sea spray, can't you?
You can.
I love the chanting of that track too. Awesome.
Now I think it's time for our story. And our story in this special episode is called Selkie, and it's by the Faerytale Apothecary.
Yes. And she rightly believes that stories can be medicine for our soul. She says that stories and storytellings have the ability to create effective change in our lives.
Oh, isn't that true?
Absolutely.
It is, isn't it?
Mm.
So have a listen to the beautiful tale of the Selkie by the Faerytale Apothecary.
Every single day for a year she would stand leaning into the Cailleach, the old woman of rock, and sing her lament out to sea. All day from dawn till dusk she would stand and sing and sing and sing, desperately waiting for a reply, but all she ever heard was the wind rushing about her and the caw of the gulls. In her human form she could not understand a word anything about her said. The Cailleach no longer shared her wisdom, or if she did, Selkie couldn't hear it anymore, not like she was now. This is where he always found her for that first year, clinging desperately to a rock she was too scared to jump from, clinging desperately to an answer that didn't come. Nothing, not a single speck of her clan announced itself to her. I get ahead of myself, for of course you'll be wanting to know how she found herself in this place to begin with, why she would spend every single day for a whole year singing out to sea, waiting for a response that didn't come. It was a practice, custom amongst her people, that every equinox they would gather together in small groups of 13, and head to the small outcrop of rock not far from the edge of land. They would shed their seal self and prance in however the moon found them on that time, because it was the equality sea, that balance of day and night, that held them in magics for their dance of the human skin. And it felt wonderful and frightening and crazy and exhilarating and vulnerable too. And they would be shy and embarrassed and giggle about each other, and it was the only time they were ever separate, male from female, when they danced in human skins. So this is what the lone fishing man found. That night, that fateful night when he realised at 2 a.m. that he had forgotten to collect the traps from under the near-shore waters. The thing is, he never forgot. How could it be? For some reason, this one night, almost like it was destiny, pre-planned from something beyond his ken, he had forgotten. He knew he would get no more sleep now if he didn't, in that moment, pull on his trousers and his boots and his jacket and set out. It wouldn't take him long once he was out there, and besides, it meant that when he arrived back later that morning, he would have the first batch of bread fresh from the baker's oven. It was worth it just for that. And so it was. And so it has been. And so, perhaps, sadly, it will be again. He came across the 13 beautiful, beautiful young women dancing naked on an outcrop of rock. I don't know what you've heard about this fishing man before, but I'm quite certain it was not the full truth of it. Some have said he was a quiet man. Some have said he was a bashful man. Some have said he was an inexperienced man. None of these are the case at all. He was a handsome man. He was a charming man. He had the gift of tongue of speech that he could wrap around any to get his way. It was delight that he felt stirring deep in his loins when he saw the women, but not of innocence. It was the delight of cunning, of a man who sees what he wants and doesn't care what happens as long as he gets it. And he knew the legends, he knew the stories, knew as soon as he saw the pile high of discarded sealskins what these women really were, and knew, too, that he had to have one for his collection. There was stealth, but not of nervousness, stealth of conniving and hunting. He wasn't fussy, he didn't care which, he just grabbed one of the sealskins and stuffed it down his trousers, rubbed himself against it and slunk back away, tended to his traps under the nearshore waters and waited for the inevitable to happen. As the equality of night and day came to its conclusion, one by one, the women wrapped themselves back up in their thick fur skins of home, mutated and twisted and turned and fell clumsily into the sea back in their seal form, back to find others of their liking, back to swap stories and senses and primal urges with their kind. Except for one. Except for the one, of course, with the biggest, most intoxicatingly untouched brown eyes. The one, of course, with the strange mix of long, long brown hair that was never any shade found naturally in human woman. The one who was hairy in all the places that an adult woman should be hairy, with a fullness of breast that had the fishing man licking his lips. He was stiff from sitting in the boat for so long, not caring now about the baker's fresh bread. He made his way to the outcrop of rock. She didn't notice him at first, didn't Selkie. She was in so much panic, so much distress. It had to be here, or maybe it had accidentally fallen in the water. Her sealskin. She had left it in the pile with the others. Maybe someone had dislodged it in the scramble. No, she had it now. It was a practical joke. That was it. The others had taken it, and they would return when she was shivering and hungry and couldn't quite eat past the rawness of the live fish with her human teeth. Her clan would come back to her. It was payback, she was sure, though she couldn't actually think what it might be payback for. Or a test, a hazing. She was the youngest of them, after all. It was just some jest. All would be absolutely fine. Except why was it that the back of her neck felt prickly and uncomfortable? Why was it that there was a knotting in her stomach that wasn't because of hunger, that warned her that something really, really wasn't right? She pulled herself tight into her as she sat down there on the rock with nothing to do but wait. The water was too cold for her to slip into in this human form unprotected. She knew that. She put her hand in anyway, trying to feel around, see if her sealskin was about somewhere, caught and tangled close by. She called then, for the first time, called and called. She could see them, see her clan, see the other 12 that she had pranced on the rock with. Surely they could see her. Surely they could see her. Knew of her distress. Nothing answered. Nothing came. That's not strictly true though, is it? Something came. A true human man came. I think his first words to her were alike to, "Well, my pretty, what do we have here?" He was leering, drooling at her. He hadn't even touched her yet, but he was potent, full with his desire to have her. "Have you been washed ashore? Have you been left? Don't worry." He was courteous, charming, and he was so very, very handsome. "I'll look after you." He wrapped his jacket about her, knelt in front of her, feigned care and attention and tenderness. "How did you get out here, my darling? What's your name, my darling? You must be hungry, my darling. Let me get you something to eat. Let's get you in the warm." She was numb. She didn't know how to respond. Her body knew. Her body was... What was it? What was her body doing? It wouldn't move. It wouldn't obey her instructions. Somewhere in her was telling her to forget how cold the water is. Just get in and get out. But she had no sealskin. She had... What did she have? She didn't know. There was like a huge part of her missing. He picked her up easily. She put up no resistance. He bundled her into his boat and rowed back to shore. I like to think they tried, her kind, her clan, that they realised what was happening at the last minute and tried, and that the fishing man was just too quick. But I don't know. I don't know if they were aware of her predicament. I don't know if they were too caught up in their own revelry to pay attention. All I know is when he pulled his boat up onto land, the catch he took out was her. The catch he took straight to his bed was her. Oh, he did stop briefly by way of a cup of tea, but she barely had chance to have a too hot sip, barely had chance to burn her fingers on the edges of it before he had his way with her. You know, in those first few hours, I don't think he ever once admitted he had her sealskin. And she, the part of her mind that couldn't comprehend what was happening, had disappeared, watched everything from above, not able to associate the human female form that lay there as herself. I don't believe he admitted he had taken her sealskin the next night either, or the next after that. It was probably 7 days later, I would guess, when he was drunk, for the first time in her company, that is, most certainly not the last. It was then that he bragged to her. "You know what? I saw you," he said. "I took it," he said. "Because I knew I could," he said. "And I always get what I want," he said. He taunted her with it, hung it on the back of the kitchen door, and when she had enough sense to realise what it was, to try and make a grab for it, he had slapped her across the room away from it. No, you belong to me. That, he said, pointing at her sealskin, belongs to me. Nothing happens here without my say-so. Apart from in that second week, when she managed to find her way to the Culliach, the old woman of rock had stood by Culliach and sung out her lament to sea. It was unclear what was breaking her heart more, how this man could treat her with so little care, or how she could allow herself to be tricked in such a way. She was supposed to be a cunning, canny female after all, wasn't she? A creature of the seas and the tides and the moon, wasn't she? Isn't that what they said about shapeshifters, that they carried an otherworldly magic? Or the fact that she was deserted, maybe that broke her heart the most. Not a one of her kind came to see her. Not a one of her kind came to her aid. Not a one of her kind saved her from this misery she found herself in. Not a one of her kind were able to explain to her why she bled and then stopped. Why her belly began to grow, why she felt sick, why her breasts were getting heavy and sore, why her heart was cracking open in a different way, why she felt so much affection for this swelling within her, which in turn strangely created an affection towards him. And he in turn softened to her. As her belly got bigger, he drank a little less, wasn't so quick to temper. But also, as her belly got bigger, he made sure that her sealskin was securely locked out of her reach. But I'd forgotten to tell you that when her blood first stopped, for he kept an eye on these things, within 2 weeks he had her at the chapel, the tiny windswept place. Apt really, hovering as it did on the edge of the cliff, saved perhaps only by God from the Atlantic Ocean's angry torrents. The chapel was barely big enough, which is probably just as well. The priest and the two of them, and that was it. His one allowance was the flowers she had purposely picked, the bright and cheery yellow flowers of the gorse, unmercilessly sharp in its thorns so he couldn't get near her on that one day, her temporary ally and protector. She was grateful for that, at least. He did have a good eye for beautiful things. I'm not sure if that is in his favour or not. The dress he got for her was stunning, and it was perhaps such a shame that nobody save him and the priest got to see her fully. Stood as she was in the first flush, first bloom of motherhood, radiant was she, and very, very lovely. The priest whispered to none but himself, "She is fair, an angel that has come to us. She is fair, an angel, 'tis true." What was the gossip about her in the town? For there would be some, no doubt of that. A man like him was always talked about, but never loud enough that you could catch it as you walked past. I fancy they thought he had probably ordered her online. Most in the town knew to stay away from him, so she could not be in any way a local lassie. And it wasn't so much that they pitied her, it wasn't that. And they didn't shun her, though they kept a bit of a distance because of him. But there was something about her, about those big brown eyes of hers, that made them feel tender towards her, care for her, want to help her in any way they could. But if she tried to speak of who she was, the words would come out in a jumbled, tangled mess that made no sense to anybody, least of all her. There was, fortunately, just one though. One woman of age, the exact type of woman of age who knows of the Cailleach that lives in the rock, the type of woman of age that can still hear the words of the wind as it shouts and collides about. The type of woman of age that was able to guide Selkie. The type of woman of age that was able to be called upon as midwife. The type of woman of age that is mistaken for harmless. The type of woman of age that was able to see under the surface of things, and she wasn't afraid of this fishing man. The woman of age instructed Selkie, explained to her what was happening in her body, explained to her that after 9 months what she might be likely to expect. So it came to be that Selkie was prepared in some way. No pain could be worse, she reckoned, than the pain she had already felt. And it wasn't the discomfort or the difficulty in climbing up to the cliff edge that was changing her patterns, her ways of being, for still after the year was out and the 9 months almost up too, not a one of her kind had answered her call, her song that she sent out to sea. It was something else. It was that growing sense of care that she felt for the life inside her. It was the hope that however much she tried to stifle it grew at the same rate as her belly. When the child was born, a girl, a healthy, bonny baby girl, I don't think there was a single... No, there was one, the woman of age. She was probably the only one in the whole town that was surprised when the fishing man stopped drinking completely. For sure he was bad-tempered and grumpy and sulking, but the sight of that baby girl caught his breath in such a way that he was completely enamoured. There was not a thing he would not do for her. Phrases like, "it was the making of him," were bandied about, and although at this stage he could barely tolerate being around Selkie, he tried. He did his best for the sake of his daughter. Selkie's presence was always a reminder of what he had done, of how he had treated others, of how he got what he wanted. I think maybe it's the first time in his life he felt shame. But she was the mother of his child, and he would never, never deny anything that his daughter wanted. She could have the world, and if what she wanted went against what he wanted, it didn't matter. Her needs, her wants, her desires were the most important thing. She was a goddess to him. He worshipped her. And she, as she grew, loved her father and loved her mother, carried the best of both of them within her. She was otherworldly and magic and stubborn and fierce, all in one pretty package. She was 5, 6, perhaps 7. Let's say she was 7 when he unlocked the safe in the attic, opened the squeaking door and pulled out the parcel it held and took it down to his wife. He threw it at her, embarrassed, guilt-edged. He'd gone from wanting, desiring, coveting Selkie to needing her, leaning on her, craving her. There was a begrudging respect and acknowledgement, yes, but no real appreciation all the same. She, for her part, had begun to find it impossible to hate somebody that had co-created what she loved most in the world. So almost like back in that first moment when she had found her sealskin was missing, now she had it there, sat in her lap, wrapped in tatty brown paper, grease-stained from the oils of the sealskin. She didn't know what to do. She felt a part of her drift away again. She didn't dare touch it. She knew if she touched it with her fingertips, it would start to call to her too loudly to ignore. She put it back in the safe herself that night, kissed her daughter on the forehead as she slept, snoring so sweetly. And she went back out into the moonlit night to the Cailleach, to the edge of the sea. It was almost equinox once more, almost time when the prancing and the shedding and the being in human form would begin again. When she stood there looking out, she found that she couldn't deny the hate that she felt. They had left her. They had abandoned her. Not a single one had tried to help her. If she were to pick up her sealskin, if she were to put it on, wouldn't she be abandoning her own child? She didn't know. She didn't trust herself to be able to come back again. She wished he'd never given it back to her, wished he'd never given her the choice, just as all those years ago she had wished he'd never taken her from her in the first place. So she pretended. She pretended it didn't exist, pretended it was all some strange, chaotic dream, that she had never been anything other than human. This just made her sick. Knowing that at any moment she could wrap about her once more her true self, it gnawed at her, pecked at her, ate away at her, till it wasn't just the rocks and the sea she didn't visit anymore. She could barely make it out into the garden that she had spent so many hours tending. The woman of age, who was probably never anything other than a woman of age, was one of those women of age that could have been 70 or 200, the one that knew and saw everything. She sat at Selkie's bedside, held her hands and called her child, soothed her brow and whispered to her of Selkie's heart's longings, but Selkie turned her head away and refused to listen. 3 times over the course of 3 months the woman of age tried. She felt towards Selkie as though Selkie were her own kin, such fondness the woman of age had for her. "Please," she said to Selkie, "take the skin and go home." But then Selkie would catch sight of her daughter and refuse. "I will not be an abandoner." Even the fishing man tried to persuade her to go. In the middle of the night, when Selkie had finally managed to get to sleep, he'd snuck up and got the seal skin and taken it back down and wrapped it around her, sure that just being skin to skin would make the difference. But there was more to it than that. The intention was not there for transformation to occur. Her own want wasn't fully aligned with the sealskin, and the sealskin knew this. It would not return if it was not wanted, not fully embraced. Selkie and the fishing man sat her down, their beloved daughter. Maybe not the whole truth, but they told her a part of the truth, at least of what her mother really was. She was 21. No, she wasn't. She was 18 when her mother, Selkie, died. Died in the bed that the daughter herself had been born in. Wasted away was Selkie to almost nothing but a sack of bones. The daughter plotted and planned with the woman of age who would surely outlive everybody. This is what happens when you remember how to listen to the wind and listen to the sea and listen to your heart. You outlive everybody because you are part of everything, and you never, ever forget that. They insisted now that Selkie be given a sky burial, and the town, remembering how the fishing man could be, not a one refused. "Let my mother's false skin be taken from her bones," was all the daughter said, and so it was. She was an exceptional young new woman, this daughter of Selkie and the fishing man. The woman of age had high hopes for her. With just a little bit of guidance and coaxing in the right ways, with all that was carried in her blood, perhaps the mantle could be passed on at last. Perhaps the woman of age would be allowed to become dust as new generation carried the magics forward. The daughter tended her mother's body as was proper, and when the false skin was finally removed from her bones, she asked her father for the sealskin that she might wrap her mother up in it and return her home. Well, his daughter always got what she wanted. He handed it to her easily. What neither of them had expected, though, was that it wasn't her mother's bones that the sealskin now called to, and this was a daughter who always got what she wanted. So as she came to wrap her mother about in her sealskin, the sealskin had other ideas. I don't know if there was vengeance in the daughter's heart. I don't think her mother ever told her how she felt betrayed and left by her clan. So when the daughter slipped from the rocks, though it's important that you know that she held off, although she could feel the calling so strongly, feel the calling of the world deep in her blood, she honoured the life of her mother first and took her bones down to the sea. I confess I find this hard to sit with. Who can say if it was the right thing to do, if this is what the mother would have wanted? But there was a pleasing in the sense that she was home at last, back where it was proper for her to be. The daughter had sense enough too to wait for the next equinox as was proper and take her mother's place on the outcropping of rock. They welcomed her, for it was a new generation now that pranced. The whys and wherefores of the behaviour of the previous clan were forgotten, unknown. I think they had just been too scared to help her. They didn't know how, and they too knew the stories of what happened when a human stole your skin. I think they all just did the best they could in the situation. Or maybe I'm simply making excuses for them. I don't know. What I do know is the welcoming, the embracing, the joy, the delight that they were able to be this new group of 13. We always knew there was something missing, one of them said, and now we know it was you. They hugged the daughter and embraced her and pranced with such abandon, and when the sun began its slow, steady, sleepy rise, all 13 of them wrapped sealskins about themselves and fell into their watery depths of a home, content and happy, keen to find their male counterparts to continue the cycles once more.
Wow, that was just beautiful.
It was.
I love her. I do love her storytelling. Elizabeth has a collection of healing stories for us all on her website. Find out more, including where to find her and her work, in our show notes at celticmythpodshow.com/sealfolk.
Brilliant. Now, let's have some more Selkie music, because we need more.
We do. We never have enough Selkie
You can't have enough Selkie music, can you?
Absolutely not.
And we have another bit of music from the lovely Kate and Corwen, as they sing to us of the Seal Woman's Sea Joy.
Yeah.
And that was The Seal Woman's Sea Joy by Kate Fletcher and Corwen Brock from their fantastic album, Fish or Fowl.
Corwen tells us that both of the tracks that we played in this special show are said to have been sung by Selkie folk. You can find out more about Fish or Fowl, which is a whole album more or less all about Selkies, in our show notes at celticmythpodshow.com/sealfolk.
Excellent. So what have we got now?
Well, how do you fancy another old story about these seal people?
Sounds good to me.
This is a story from The Fairy Mythology by Thomas Keatley, published way back in 1870. It is called The Mermaid Wife.
The Mermaid Wife by Thomas Keatley. On a fine summer's evening, an inhabitant of Unst happened to be walking along the sandy margin of a small bay. The moon was risen, and by her light he discerned at some distance before him a number of sea people, who were dancing with great vigour on the smooth sand. Near them he saw lying on the ground several sealskins. As the man approached the dancers, all gave over their merriment and flew like lightning to secure their garments. Then, clothing themselves, plunged in the form of seals into the sea. But the Shetlander, on coming to the spot where they had been, and casting his eyes down on the ground, saw that they had left one sealskin behind them, which was lying just at his feet. He snapped it up, carried it swiftly away, and placed it in security. On returning to the shore, he met the fairest maiden that the eye had ever gazed upon. She was walking backwards and forwards, lamenting in the most piteous tones for the loss of her sealskin robe, without which she could never hope to rejoin her family and friends below the waters, but must remain an unwilling inhabitant of the region enlightened by the sun. The man approached and endeavoured to console her, but she would not be comforted. She implored him in the most moving accents to restore her dress, but the view of her lovely face, more beautiful in tears, had steeled his heart. He represented to her the impossibility of her return, and that her friends would soon give her up, and finally made an offer to her of his heart, his hand, and his fortune. The sea maiden, finding she had no alternative, at length consented to become his wife. They were married and lived together for many years, during which time they had several children, who retained no vestiges of their marine origin, saving a thin web between their fingers and a bend of their hands resembling that of the forepaws of a seal, distinctions which characterise the descendants of the family to the present day. The Shetlander's love for his beautiful wife was unbounded, but she made a cold return to his affection. Often she would steal out alone and hasten down to the lonely strand, and there at a given signal a seal of large size would make his appearance, and they would converse for hours together in an unknown language. And she would return home from this meeting, pensive and melancholy. And thus gilded away years, and her hopes of leaving the upper world had nearly vanished, when it chanced one day that one of her children, playing on a stack of corn, found a sealskin. Delighted with his prize, he ran with breathless eagerness to display it before his mother. Her eyes glistened with delight at the view of it, for in it she saw her own dress, the loss of which had cost her so many tears. She now regarded herself as completely emancipated from thraldom, and in idea she was already with her friends beneath the waves. One thing alone was a drawback on her raptures. She loved her children, and she was about to leave them forever. Yet they weighed not against the pleasures she had in prospect. So after kissing and embracing them several times, she took up the skin and went out and proceeded down to the beach. A few minutes later, after the husband came in, the children told him what had occurred, The truth instantly flashed across his mind, and he hurried down to the shore with all speed that love and anxiety could give. But he only arrived in time to see his wife take the form of a seal, and from the ledge of a rock plunge into the sea. The large seal with whom she held her conversations immediately joined her and congratulated her on her escape, and they quitted the shore together. But ere she went, she turned round to her husband, who stood in mute despair on the rock, and whose misery excited feelings of compassion in her breast. "Farewell," said she to him, "and may all good fortune attend you. I loved you well while I was with you, but I always loved my first husband better."
That has to be the most famous tale about Selkies, and as Morgan said earlier, it's very reminiscent of other folk tales about the fairy wife, with the Selkie being forced into marriage with a mortal man because he's captured her sealskin.
Yes, doesn't seem very fair though, does it?
Fair?
Yeah. I mean, he hides her skin, and then she has to basically...
Well, there's probably a moral in it somewhere.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. Doesn't seem very fair. Now let's have another piece of magical Selkie music. Have a listen to Paul Newman and his beautiful track, Shore of Dreams.
The taste of salt and ocean's roar on a coast I'd never been before. The stones are strange, the sand is brown. I close my eyes and lay me down. I see a ring of dancers there with moonlit skin and waist-long hair. I find a coat to keep me warm, that I may watch the dance till dawn. That coat is mine, she says to me, and is my passport to the sea. Though on the land I sometimes roam, the waves and water are my home. I say fate has brought us here tonight, I'll keep this coat and hold it tight. I live such a lonely life, if I keep this you'll be my wife. Maybe so, she says to me, what will you give for my dowry? I swear to you by wave and foam, to give you comfort, hearth and home. She breathes her name into my ears, daylight comes and sun appears. A name I will hear evermore when I hear waves upon the shore.
That was Shore of Dreams by Paul Newman from his album Passing Fair. Details of where to find Paul's wonderful music can be found in our show notes at celticmythpodshow.com/sealfolk.
Goodness, now we must be getting close to the end of the show. Have we got anything else?
Well, some time ago, you recorded a reading of a poem about a seal wife for the thought-provoking Inciting a Riot podcast.
Oh yes, I did.
Well, with Firelight's very kind permission, we can bring you The Seal Wife by Signe Pike.
The Seal Wife by Signe Pike. Sometimes when we fight, I want to slip on my sealskin and disappear beneath the waves. I warned you when we married, there are only so many times I can drink my own tears before the ocean comes frothing and roaring to claim me, because the ocean loves her daughters and doesn't take kindly to men. The moon glinted full and fat-bellied over the sharp steel and spires the night we first met. Your kiss was the carbon of earth and of beer, and I, intoxicated, could not drink enough. We spelled each other's names high above the river, and in the factory far beneath us, in the early morning hours, came the soft smell of yeast and freshly baked bread. I followed you south like a snowbird, body bright with the promise of dunes and bathwater, to a land where mosquitoes bit like wildfire, where haints lingered in front hallways and bottles decked trees to keep away the dead. Where were my rocks, my mosses, my shaly cold waters of green? Where there were dunes and bathwater, there were dishes to scour and laundry to fold. I tucked my sealskin away, where it mouldered and stank as my body grew old. One night I'll break free, and hair streaming behind I'll race for the beach. The wind, brackish and thick, will soften the air and cling to my cheek. I won't be able to hear you over the sound of my feet pounding the wood, the roar of the water, the hot lure of sand. Around me the sea brush will twist and sing, sheltering the boardwalk in 1,000 arches. A tunnel of green that will carry me away back to the sea.
That was lovely. And thank you to Firelight and Signe Pike for permission to bring this poem to you. You can find the Inciting a Riot podcast at incitingariot.com.
Yes, do go and have a listen and support him.
And before we go, we've just got some time for some lovely listener feedback.
Hi Ruth and Gary, Dan Papworth here, author of The Lives Around Us, Daily Meditations for Nature Connection. I wanted to thank you for all the Celtic stories over the years. I'd never heard of most of them before hearing about your podcast on Druidcast. There's a lovely lyrical quality to this storytelling, a sense of true connection with the land. It's wonderful to start my day with your bardic gifts, and I wish you all the very best for the future. Really enjoying the story of Branwen, and I hope I say this right, Danach Bendith.
Thank you very much for your feedback, Dan. We're so glad you have enjoyed our retelling of the Celtic myths.
Yes, and your book sounds fascinating. Do you know where we can find it?
Yes, I found it, and there is a link to the book on Amazon in our show notes. In fact, if there's something you've heard on the show and you'd like to know more about it, please visit our show notes for this episode at celticmythpodshow.com/sealfolk.
We hope you've enjoyed this special Selkie episode, and a huge thank you to all of our contributors and to the Facebook folk who helped to inspire this show. Many of you commented on the beautiful photo of the Selkies seal statue in the Faroe Islands that started our conversation rolling on Facebook. The picture was taken by talented photographer Jay Swank. You can now buy 2 prints of this beautiful Selkie statue from his website at www.dvos-photo.com. As always, for more information, check out the show notes. That really does bring us to the end of the show, and we'd like to wish you many blessings and say Hurvaur.
You have been listening to the Celtic Myth Pod Show. If you enjoyed listening to this show, please come and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Celtic Myth Podcast.
We hope you'll stay tuned for the next episode. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at celticmythshow@gmail.com or come and chat to us on social media. All of the links are on our contact page on our website at celticmythpodshow.com.
We'd also like to send out a big shout of thanks to Kulan's Hounds for our theme music, and that's available at sfhounds.com.
This show is a Celtic Myth Show production.